My name is Vanessa Hodges, and I never imagined my wedding day would end with my best friend handing me divorce papers she had already filed with my husband. What was meant to be a vow of love became a public humiliation I'll never forget. Tonight, I want to take you inside that moment. The betrayal, the silence, and the quiet power I found on the other side. As you listen, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe and tap the like button so more people can join us in these stories. The wind coming off Boston Harbor lifted the red carpet at the Institute's glass doors like it wanted to roll the night back up and put it away. I reached for the handle. A suited arm slid between my hand and the chrome bar. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." His voice was quiet enough to be polite and loud enough for the small crowd behind me to hear. Sequins. Tuxedos. The tremor of a string quartet leaking through the glass. A woman in a winter white shawl paused and watched me the way people watch a near miss at an intersection. Eyes hooked on the possibility of impact. I smiled. "Ma'am," I repeated, and the guard blinked. "I'm on the list." He didn't look at the iPad yet. He looked at the tiny two-way in his ear, listening to whoever held his paycheck. "Ms. Hodges, right? I'm sorry, you've been flagged." He swallowed. "By the hosts. There is a specific temperature to public humiliation. It starts in the knees and moves up the spine, like standing in an MRI while someone narrates your worst memory." My breath fogged the glass. Through it, I saw a wall of donor names etched in steel and a gold banner. Harbor Future's Scholarship Gala. From the mezzanine, Lila lifted her champagne flute. Her mouth made a sympathetic curve for the balcony audience and a private smirk for me. She was in emerald silk and the same diamond ear cuffs I picked out with her in a South End boutique, back when friendship meant we tried on mirrors of each other. She touched Daniel's forearm. He adjusted his cufflinks like they were tight on him. My ex-husband never met a reflective surface he didn't think was applauding. "If you know this feeling," I said to the people who understand why a person learns to build spine out of ground glass, "stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you want more stories that end with the truth getting its turn at the microphone, hit subscribe and tap the like button. I promise I'll earn it." The guard's eyes softened. "I'm really sorry. The couple asked that you not enter." "The couple?" I repeated, simple as a diagnosis. "Did they sign the building too?" "Ma'am, look at your list," I said evenly. "Under presenting sponsor." He hesitated, tapped, scrolled. His mouth pressed thin. "North Ferry Trust." "Keep scrolling." He did. The screen reflected in the glass like a quiet confession. His eyes flicked up, measuring me in the coat I'd chosen for a night that would require armor. The midnight wool, the careful line of a lapel that said I was finished being anyone's spectacle. "Vanessa Hodges," he read. "Trustee." A woman near the velvet rope made a small, surprised sound. Several phones were already at shoulder height, filming and pretending not to. Lila leaned on the balcony rail. Daniel's smile tilted into amusement. Lila called down, bright as a toast. "Ness, it's a private event. You understand." I turned to the guard. "You can tell them they're mistaken, or I can." I kept my hands in the pockets of my coat. Still. Unmoved. "Your choice." He exhaled, stepped aside. Inside, the air changed temperature, that expensive blend of florals and wood polish and old money trying to smell like progress. A volunteer with a tray of programs took a half step back when she saw me, then forward again when I smiled. "Welcome, Ms. Hodges." "Thank you," I said, and accepted a program. On the cover was the sketch of a lighthouse, which felt appropriate. Light doesn't have to shout. It just has to refuse to lie. We met at the foot of the stairs like actors reaching their marks. Lila descended one slow step at a time, eyes bright in the way people's eyes get when they're performing empathy to a crowd. Daniel chose arrogance, his resting face. The mezzanine hush spread in rings. "Vanessa," Lila said, palms open. "This isn't personal. I can't think of anything more personal than your voice in the ear of a man I used to love, telling a stranger to keep me out of a building I help fund. Her smile tensed. We only wanted to avoid a scene. Then you probably shouldn't have built one. Daniel slid in. It's a big night for us, he said, as if I'd forgotten I'd created the scholarship after my father died, as if the gala were their idea on loan from the universe. You understand. He always assumed I would do the emotional labor of understanding him. We were division of labor embodied. I did the work. He did the talking. She did the listening that felt like applause. He shifted his weight to his back foot, using height like a weapon. His tuxedo said he belonged. My posture said I didn't need clothes to argue my case. Security was just doing their job, Lila offered. We didn't want to upset you. That's considerate, I said, especially after the last time you handed me paperwork. She blinked. This was the game we played now. I said something true and left it on the table like a loaded cutlery set. Her fingers touched the rail. A tremor. She recovered quickly. Let's not dredge up the past, she said, with sweetness poured over barbed wire. Past? I tilted my head. You gave me divorce papers in front of a priest. A ripple moved through the mezzanine. The quartet stopped mid-phrase. A silver spoon tinged the rim of a glass somewhere and stopped. Boston is a city that pretends minding its business is a virtue and rarely practices it. Daniel's laugh was tiny and engineered. We're all adults. I turned to the volunteer at the check-in table. Can you fetch the event director? Nora McCready. Lila's eyes narrowed by a fraction. Daniel's jaw moved like he was grinding a sesame seed into dust. I watched their hands. Lila's were too still. Daniel's left thumb stroked the edge of his cufflink. Body language never lies. It only hopes you're not fluent. Nora arrived at a quick clip, hair escaping her chignon with purpose. She'd built this gala with me in late-night Google Docs and handwritten lists. She took in the tableau with a single sweep and stopped beside me like a chosen side. Ms. Hodges, she said. Everything all right? Depends who you ask, I said. Did you receive the updated seating chart? Yes. She glanced at Lila and Daniel with professional blandness. And the program change. Lila's smile thinned. Program change? Nora lifted a folder. The student speaker is introducing the founder of the fund. But, Daniel started. I took the folder, skimmed the page that mattered, and handed it back. Thank you, Nora. Of course. Nora's mouth warmed at the edges. We're grateful for everything you've done for these kids. Would you like to see them before the program starts? I would. Lila stepped down one more stair, putting herself between me and the hallway. Vanessa, please. Her voice went smaller. Private. We didn't want this tonight. You've been through enough. Let's not... Finish the sentence, I said softly. Let's not what? She wet her lip. Let's not make people pick sides. They already have sides, I said. They just haven't admitted it in public. Daniel shifted again, hunting for leverage and finding none. You don't have to do this. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm walking into a room I helped build. I stepped past them. The volunteers watched with a mixture of relief and appetite. The student honorees gathered near the portrait gallery, each holding a note card they'd run through so many times the corners had gone soft. A boy in a too-large jacket looked up at me like he was trying to memorize the face of oxygen. Ms. Hodges? He asked. Are you the lighthouse lady? I smiled. I am. He glanced at my bare left hand, the pale band none of us can scrub out. He didn't mention it. Mercy is a fluent language in kids who needed it and got it too late. Behind us, Lila and Daniel conferred in low tones that wanted to be music. I caught only a few words. Optics, board, donors. None of them were love. None of them ever were. Can I tell you something? The boy asked, lowering his voice as if gossip were a sacred act. Of course. When they said you might not come, he whispered. I thought, people like you don't get told where they can't go. People like me. I tasted the grammar of it. People who survive. People who learn how to make silence a hinge instead of a cage. People who understand humiliation isn't the end. It's a lever. If you've got the patience to build the fulcrum. You're going to be fine up there, I told him. Pretend you're talking to one person who needs to hear it. There's always one. He nodded, squared his shoulders, and I recognized myself 20 years ago in a borrowed blazer at a community center podium, reading from a future I didn't believe I could afford. Nora signaled the quartet. The first notes rose again. The audience drifted to their seats like tide obeying their chairs. I walked toward the stage entrance. The program sat heavy in my hand. Weight is a language, too. At the stage door, Daniel intercepted me, smile pasted back on like a label he wasn't ready to peel. "We can handle the remarks," he said. "You don't need to put yourself through this." "That sentence," I said, "is the most honest thing you've said all night." He blinked. "What?" "You don't want me to put you through this." "Vanessa?" I held up a hand. "Don't call me Ness." For a beat, he was the man from our first winter, cheeks red from the cold, quoting poetry because he'd memorized whatever got him indoors. Then the performance clicked back in. "We're trying to be civilized." "You think civility is what keeps you safe," I said, voice low. "Because for years it did." Lila hovered a step behind him. Her face was careful. "We should be allies," she said. "We want the same thing." "No," I said. "You want to be seen wanting the same thing." A tiny silence. Then, for the first time all evening, Lila's eyes revealed the thing underneath, the calculation bruised by the possibility of a failed plan. She touched Daniel's sleeve, a little too hard. "Maybe we all say a few words," she suggested sweetly to Nora. "Share the credit." Nora glanced at me, then at them. "Actually, the donor recognition is fixed." She nodded at the page. "Per the contract." "Contract?" Daniel said. I kept my gaze on Lila. "You should read more of what you sign." "Like marriage licenses?" she said, and she wanted that to hurt. "It didn't," I said, and let the truth be a knife with no flourish. "Not anymore." She flinched, tiny and real. Daniel straightened, searching for the exit door none of us could see. I stepped onto the stage's side stairs and paused halfway, where the lights made a clean line between audience and action. From here, the harbor was a mirror in the dark, the museum's glass holding our reflections like a jury. I could feel every inhale in the room. I could feel the old story. The woman turned away at the door, pressing against my back like a hand. I turned and looked at them both, not with rage but with clarity. "There's a reason you asked a guard to keep me out," I said calmly. "Not because I would make a scene, because I learned how not to." Daniel's mouth opened and closed. Lila's fingers curled against the rail. Somewhere in the second row, a donor whispered to his wife. The student with the too large jacket watched me like people watch a storm from a sturdy house. I reached for the microphone waiting at center stage and stopped with my hand a breath away. Timing matters. So does origin story. If I told the room everything now, the narrative would taste like victory without context. It would be sugar without blood. I stepped back from the light and let the MC take his place. "Not yet," I told my heartbeat. "Earn it. Make them sit in it." As the MC welcomed the room, my eyes found the gold banner again. The lighthouse drawn with a single unbroken line. That was the difference now. I'd stopped letting them break my lines. On my way to the wings, I passed Lila at the foot of the stairs. She murmured, too soft for the microphones, "You'll regret this." I smiled the way you smile at a forecast you already prepared for. "So will you," I said, with a gentleness that made her blink. "Just not for the reason you think." The applause swelled. The boy in the too large jacket took the stage and cleared his throat. A hush fell like snow. I touched the edge of the manila folder in my bag, the one whose weight told a different story than the papers she'd once put in my hands. I let my fingers rest there and breathe. This didn't start at the institute doors. It started when my maid of honor slipped a document into my palm between vows and called it love. Let me rewind. Before the storm, my life looked polished from the outside. The kind of life people measure themselves against at brunch, never knowing how much scaffolding holds the illusion steady. I had the husband who could charm a table with one story, the best friend who never missed a milestone, the career that put my name on brass plaques, and the townhouse that caught sunlight in all the right corners. It wasn't perfect, but I believed in its shape, believed that love and loyalty were permanent walls, not rental scaffolds. Daniel was the golden veneer. He knew how to command attention in a room without lifting his voice. At fundraisers, he was the man donors shook hands with first, even though I was the one who drafted the proposals and built the connections. He played the role of husband with practiced elegance, hand at the small of my back, smile at the right moments, eyes lingering on me like I was both prize and proof. He wasn't cruel. That would have been too obvious. His power came in the gentle dismissal, the way he could make my victories sound like extensions of his own. Vanessa always finds a way to make things happen, he'd tell the board, as if I were a charming trick rather than the architect of the vision. And then there was Lila. We had been friends since we were 12, when her family moved to our neighborhood on the South Shore. I had been the quiet one, the daughter of a fisherman whose hands smelled of salt and iron, while she had been the girl with glossy hair and the self-assurance of someone raised to believe the world tilted slightly in her favor. She knew how to shine, how to tell a story about spilling coffee on herself and make it sound like the universe's joke. I loved her for that. Or maybe I loved the way I disappeared beside her glow, safe from scrutiny. We carried each other into womanhood, late-night study sessions, shared closets, whispered confessions. When Daniel proposed, there was no question who would be my maid of honor. The three of us made an odd triangle, but I didn't notice how strange until later. Daniel admired Lila's ease, her charm, her laugh that tilted her head back. I thought it was admiration the way you admire art in a gallery. You appreciate it, but you don't take it home. Lila loved Daniel's attention, the way he listened, how he remembered her favorite wine without asking. I thought it was friendship, the way you lean on your best friend's partner when life grows heavy. I didn't see the edge in the symmetry. In those months before the wedding, I thought I was standing on bedrock. Work was flourishing. The North Ferry Trust had just launched its biggest initiative, scholarships for kids from fishing towns like mine, kids who needed more than luck. I poured myself into it. Late nights of spreadsheets, calls with lawyers, visits to schools. Daniel said he admired my drive, though he never offered to stay up with me. "You've got it handled," he'd say, then kiss my forehead and retreat to bed. I told myself it was balance, that I was the storm, and he was the harbor. Planning the wedding became Lila's playground. She loved details, flower palettes, cake tastings, linen swatches. I let her because I was exhausted from juggling board meetings and deadlines. "You're the bride," she'd say with a grin. "Your only job is to show up radiant." And I believed her. Believed she wanted to gift me ease, not claim control. The subtle signs were there, like hairline cracks in plaster. At the bridal shower, when Daniel walked in to surprise me, it was Lila he hugged first, arms lingering a second too long. "You look incredible," he whispered, and I told myself it was because he was nervous around crowds. At the tux fitting, when I was fumbling with a button, Lila was the one who stepped in to straighten it, laughing, her hands too familiar. "You'd fall apart without me," she teased. I agreed, because in that moment I believed it was true. Power was the silent current beneath everything. Daniel controlled rooms, Lila controlled narratives, and I controlled outcomes, though quietly, so no one mistook me for grasping. I thought love meant giving others their space to shine. I thought loyalty was unshakable, a lighthouse beam that never falters. I thought silence was strength, the kind that doesn't need validation. I see now how those assumptions betrayed me. The night before the wedding, I sat on my bed with the veil spread across my lap like a snowfall. My father was gone, my mother lived states away, and the house was too quiet. Lila called to remind me to rest, her voice bright. "Tomorrow is your day, Ness," she said. "Everything's going to be perfect." I clung to those words like scripture, not realizing perfection was a stage already set. and I was the final prop. If I had looked closer, I might have seen how often Daniel's eyes flicked to his phone when we were together. I might have asked why Lila seemed to know answers before I gave them. I might have noticed the way their conversations had rhythms without me. But I believed in the story I'd written. Husband, best friend, home, purpose. I believed in my own invincibility. What I didn't know was that both of them had already rehearsed my downfall. That the vows I thought would anchor me were just set dressing for a different performance. That my silence, the thing I thought made me dignified, would be used to paint me powerless. I carried one core belief into that day, a belief I clung to like a lifeline. If you love people fully, they will never betray you. And that was the very lie they built their plan on. The morning of my wedding was clear enough to feel like a promise. Boston sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of the old church, painting the pews with amber and violet. My dress felt weightless when I slipped into it, as though silk could erase gravity. People were filling the seats, whispering, smiling, craning for glimpses of lace. I told myself, this is the moment everything I've worked for finally comes together. The music swelled. My hand tightened around the bouquet. At the front of the church, Daniel stood tall in his tuxedo, handsome enough to convince the world he had been carved for me. Beside him, in that sacred spot meant for loyalty, stood Lila, my best friend, radiant in pale gold, holding her position as though she had been waiting for this stage her entire life. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed it. Not Daniel's eyes on me, though they were, but Lila's hand tightening on a manila envelope, angled just enough to be hidden by her bouquet. At first, I thought it was a program or her speech notes. Then the music dimmed and time slowed until I could hear only the rustle of fabric and the echo of my shoes against the aisle runner. When I reached the altar, Daniel took my hand with a squeeze that felt more like restraint than affection. His smile was taut, sculpted for the guests. Lila leaned in, her perfume brushing against me, and whispered, I need you to hold this, Ness. She slid the envelope into my palm, quick and seamless, like passing a secret note in school. My fingers curled around it automatically, out of old habit. My best friend hands me something. I take it. That's what we did. I lowered my gaze just enough to see the bold header through the paper. Commonwealth of Massachusetts, petition for divorce. My lungs forgot air. The church blurred. The priest cleared his throat, ready to speak, but his words never landed. I looked up at Daniel. His eyes didn't waver. He wanted me to see the calm in them, the certainty. It was a look that said, you won't make a scene. You never do. Is this a joke? I whispered, though my voice cracked enough that the first few rows heard. Lila smiled as if to reassure me, but her eyes glittered sharp. It's better this way, she murmured. The congregation stirred. Murmurs rippled like wind over tall grass. I could feel the weight of every gaze pressing against my skin, burning through the satin. The priest hesitated, flipping his notes as though a page might save him. My mother dabbed at her eyes in confusion. No one moved to help. Not one soul interrupted. Multiple betrayals don't arrive one at a time. They fall like glass shattering, shards hitting every corner of the room. Daniel's betrayal was obvious, raw in my hand. Lila's betrayal was sharpened by years of friendship. But the silence of the others, the priest, the family, the guests who stared but did nothing, that was the chorus. That was the confirmation that humiliation was allowed to bloom if it was dressed up as civility. Daniel leaned close enough for only me to hear. You'll sign them. It's cleaner this way. His hand was steady, rehearsed. I wanted to scream. Wanted to hurl the papers into his face, rip them into confetti that would litter the altar. But my body betrayed me. My throat locked. My hands trembled. The air thinned until the room tilted sideways. The panic wasn't loud. It was suffocatingly quiet, a collapse that made every breath sound like drowning. I looked at him, at her, and the strangest truth bubbled up. I loved them still. In that moment, twisted as it was, some part of me clung to the memory of laughter, of shared secrets, of whispered promises in the dark. Even as they destroyed me, the muscle memory of affection tried to anchor me to the ruins. Love, I realized, is stubborn. It doesn't evacuate just because the house is on fire. Shame soaked me next, hot and unrelenting. I thought of the donors who sat in the pews, the colleagues, the neighbors who would carry this story into dinner conversations. Did you hear? On her wedding day. I thought of the students whose scholarship I fought for, wondering if they'd read headlines one day about their so-called benefactor abandoned at the altar. The humiliation was public property now. My vision tunneled. Lila touched my arm as if steadying me, but the gesture was theater, designed to look like comfort to the audience while pressing the knife deeper. Daniel stepped back, giving me space as though he were merciful. Every move choreographed. The priest cleared his throat again. "Perhaps we should continue," Daniel interrupted. His voice was strong, commanding, as if he were the one protecting dignity. The room obeyed. I felt something fracture inside me. Not a clean break, but a splintering that spread through ribs, spine, skull. The collapse wasn't visible, but I could feel myself slipping out of the body that stood in white at the altar. I was watching from somewhere just above, detached, a ghost in the rafters. Lila leaned closer again. "You'll thank us later," she whispered, and the lie was so bold it nearly jolted me back into myself. The ceremony dissolved around me. Words washed over, vows I never spoke, applause I never joined, a kiss I never received. Time bent. My hands let the envelope slide to the floor, though no one stooped to pick it up. It lay there between us, a quiet corpse. I walked out before the recessional began. My legs carried me down the aisle, past the guests whose eyes darted away. The photographer lowered his camera. The organist faltered. My mother rose, then sat, then rose again, torn between chasing me and obeying tradition. No one followed. Outside, the air was knife-sharp with November cold. The sky had turned iron gray, the kind of color that promised snow. I stepped onto the church steps and realized my hands were shaking so hard the bouquet petals scattered like torn wings. Cars passed. Strangers glanced, indifferent. My body moved toward the street, but my mind dissolved. Panic and shame warred inside me, but beneath them was a quiet current of something worse. Hollowness. As if they hadn't just betrayed me, but vacuumed out who I thought I was. I disappeared that day. Not just from the church, not just from the marriage that never began. I disappeared from myself, the woman who believed in loyalty, in friendship, in love as permanence. She scattered with the petals, with the vows that never landed. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of Lila's laugh, carrying faintly through the church doors behind me, bright and victorious. And then the city swallowed me whole. Boston became unlivable after the wedding, not because the city itself changed, but because every brick seemed to remember. The coffee shop near the harbor where Daniel once wrote me poems on napkins. The bench at the public garden where Lila and I fed ducks during our broke college years. The church itself, its spire stabbing the sky like an accusation. I couldn't walk 2 blocks without colliding with ghosts. So I left. I took a sublet in Providence under a different name. Vanessa Hodges didn't exist there. The landlord knew me as Ann Carter, a name plucked from the spine of an abandoned library book. I paid cash, stopped answering my phone, and sent an email to my employer saying only, "I need time." I never said how long. The apartment was one room with peeling paint and radiators that clanged at night like restless skeletons. The windows overlooked an alley where dumpsters overflowed and cats hissed at each other for territory. Perfect, I thought. A place nobody would look for someone who once wore white silk and pearls. My routine became mechanical. Wake. Boil water for instant coffee. Stare at the chipped mug until the steam vanished. Walk to the corner store for bread, then back. Sit on the floor with my back against the radiator and read whatever book was left behind by the last tenant. Sleep when exhaustion forced it. Repeat. I stopped looking in mirrors. It wasn't disgust exactly. It was disorientation. I didn't recognize the woman with swollen eyes, the hollow cheeks, the hair that tangled no matter how I brushed it. The worst part wasn't ugliness. It was absence. As if my reflection had been replaced with a placeholder until I decided whether I wanted to come back. Hope was the first thing I exiled. I didn't plan beyond the next hour. I didn't imagine futures. The word someday felt obscene. On the rare nights I dreamed, it was always the aisle again. The envelope in my hand, Lila's whisper, Daniel's steady eyes. I would wake gasping, clawing at the blankets like they were chains. There were days I didn't speak at all. Once, I went a full week without saying a word, not even to myself. My voice cracked when I finally ordered a sandwich at the bodega, startling both me and the cashier. He didn't look at me strangely. He just slid me the sandwich and change as if silence were contagious. The lowest point arrived quietly. One night in late January, I sat by the radiator with the window cracked open, watching snow pile against the fire escape. I had a bottle of sleeping pills half finished on the counter, and I thought, maybe this is the last winter I'll have to see. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a lullaby I considered singing myself to sleep with. The snow kept falling, soft and steady. A cat yowled in the alley, a reminder that even strays fight for scraps. I held the bottle in my hand until dawn, then set it back on the counter unopened. Not because I wanted to live, but because something stubborn inside me refused to let Daniel and Lila's story be the ending. If I was going to go, it would be on my own terms, not as the shadow they had written me into. Days blurred after that. Isolation became a second skin. I was less a person than a ghost haunting my own life. But ghosts notice things the living don't. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of gray day that felt like permanent dusk. I heard a knock on the apartment door, sharp, then hesitant. I froze, heart hammering. No one knew me here, no one should. Another knock, then a voice. Anne, you dropped this in the stairwell. I opened the door a crack. A young woman stood there, holding a scarf I hadn't realized I lost. She lived 2 floors down. I'd seen her once or twice carrying laundry. Her hair was pulled back, her coat frayed, her smile unpracticed but real. Thanks, I whispered, my throat rasping like old paper. She handed it over. No problem. It's too cold to lose something like that. I nodded, expecting her to leave. But she lingered, just a second longer than politeness required. Hey, she said gently. If you ever want to grab coffee, I'm around. I closed the door after she left and leaned against it, the scarf clenched in my hands. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a rescue. It was just human. A small break in the silence, a reminder that the world still had voices other than the ones in my head. I didn't run after her. I didn't say yes. But that night, for the first time in months, I dreamed of something other than the aisle. It was only a possibility, faint and fragile as the scarf in my hands, the possibility of returning. But I hadn't decided yet. Strength didn't return all at once. It came in fragments. In the mornings, I forced myself to lace my shoes and run along the frozen Providence sidewalks. In the nights, I wrote pages I never intended to show anyone. The act of moving, of sweating, of putting pen to paper, these became my scaffolding. For the first time since the church, I felt my body and mind belonged to me again. I found work at a community legal aid office under my chosen name, Ann Carter. It wasn't glamorous. Stacks of eviction notices, custody disputes, endless calls with clients who'd long stopped believing the system saw them. But every file I touched reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. I knew how to fight. I knew how to navigate contracts, to parse clauses and signatures. The same skills I once used for grants and donors now became weapons for people no one else would defend. Pain sharpened my focus. Where I once second-guessed, I now cut directly to the heart. This clause isn't binding, I would tell a landlord. This family won't be moved until the court date. My voice didn't shake anymore. Each victory, however small, was a stitch in a new skin. I stopped being Vanessa Hodges, the woman defined by who stood beside her. Ann Carter became the woman who stood alone and held ground. That name felt earned now, not borrowed. I bought a second-hand suit from a thrift shop and wore it like armor. Symbolic or not, the uniform mattered. It told me, you've stepped out of the grave they dug for you. But strength comes with clarity, and clarity can be cruel. The betrayal I thought I had mapped was deeper than I knew. One evening, while reviewing case files, I pulled up an online court database for reference. A habit now, to check documents, to confirm signatures. And there it was. My own petition for divorce, scanned and filed into the system, stamped months earlier than my wedding day. Filed not by Daniel, but by an attorney tied to the same firm that handled North Ferry Trust's legal work. Nora's firm. Nora, the director I had trusted with the gala, the colleague who once stayed up with me drafting policies, the woman who had stood beside me after the security guard nearly turned me away. She had known. She had touched those papers long before Lila ever pressed them into my palm. The revelation landed colder than the church aisle. It meant the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was infrastructural. Daniel and Lila hadn't simply ambushed me. They had built scaffolding out of my own networks, woven in allies I never thought to question. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. Betrayal, I realized, isn't just the knife. It's also the silence of the ones who held the blade steady. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, candle burning low, scribbling names, dates, connections. I wasn't crying, I was mapping. My pain had turned to pattern recognition, and for the first time, I felt something dangerously close to purpose. I understood now. Rebirth wasn't just about survival. It was about excavation, digging through ruins until you unearth every buried truth. In the morning, I folded the thrift shop suit into a neat line across the chair. I tied my hair back with deliberate precision. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see the hollow reflection anymore. I saw someone assembling, someone waiting. Ann Carter was no longer just a refuge. She was a role I was stepping fully into. A lawyer in spirit, if not in license yet, a defender of those who had also been silenced, a woman who no longer believed loyalty was permanent. Rebirth doesn't ask permission. It demands creation. And I was only beginning to create the woman who would make them regret underestimating me. The Institute's hall gleamed like polished bone the night I returned. A year had passed, maybe more, but time had lost its teeth. I didn't come to be welcomed back. I came to confront what had been buried under glass and wine. The gala was in full swing, the same scholarship fundraiser I had once envisioned, though now the branding was different. Their branding. Daniel and Lila's names floated across the program as though they had been midwives to every dream. Photographers circled, donors clustered, and on the stage, waiting to address the crowd, stood the pair who had once rewritten my life in ink. I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front doors in a suit tailored to fit the body I had rebuilt. My heels struck the marble with steady rhythm, and though security recognized me, no one dared block my path this time. My presence alone was permission. Nora was there too, elegant, poised, still tethered to her role as director. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second. Her smile faltered, the briefest crack in a porcelain mask. That was all I needed to know. She remembered what she signed. The MC tapped the microphone. Tonight we honor the founders of the Harbor Futures expansion. I raised my voice, not loud, but clear. Correction. Every head turned. The air in the hall tightened. Lila's smile froze. Daniel's jaw clenched so subtly most wouldn't notice, but I had studied him too long to miss it. I won't take much of your evening, I said, walking toward the stage. But since we're celebrating truth and opportunity, it's only fair the room hears the full story. A murmur rippled through the donors, the kind that precedes either scandal or salvation. I stepped onto the stage without invitation. Lila reached for the microphone, but I was quicker. Many of you remember me, I began, gaze sweeping the crowd. I helped establish the North Ferry Trust. I built the scholarship program we are here to support. What you don't know is what happened on the day of my wedding. Lila moved to interject, but I lifted a hand. My voice didn't waver. On that day, in front of family, friends, and God, my maid of honor handed me divorce papers already filed with my groom. My best friend and my husband staged my humiliation as performance art, and the people who should have protected me, my eyes slid to Nora, helped make it possible. A collective intake of breath rolled across the hall. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered on the marble like punctuation. I reached into my bag and removed the folder. Not manila this time, leather-bound, organized, immaculate. I placed it on the podium and opened it to the first page. Here are the filings, time-stamped weeks before the ceremony, signatures from Daniel, witness notations from Lila, and authorization from the law firm that handled the trust's contracts. The same firm Nora oversees. Nora's face tightened, but she didn't move. Daniel swallowed, eyes darting to the crowd, measuring loyalty. Here, I continued, sliding another page into view, is correspondence between Daniel and Lila. Emails discussing my role as replaceable. My work as something they could inherit once I was erased. Their words, not mine. A gasp rose from somewhere near the front row. A donor whispered too loudly, "My God." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Calmness was the blade they hadn't prepared for. "Documents have weight," I said softly, pressing my palm against the papers. "And truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury it under charm." Daniel tried to recover. This is out of context. These are private. Facts don't need context to exist," I cut in. "You both relied on my silence. You thought humiliation would paralyze me, but silence can also sharpen, and I've spent my time sharpening." Lila's mask slipped for the first time. She stepped forward, voice trembling with forced indignation. "Why are you doing this? Haven't you moved on? This is cruel." I tilted my head. "Cruel?" The word tasted strange. "You handed me divorce papers at the altar. You made my love a spectacle. And you call this cruelty?" "No. This is accountability." The crowd hushed again, leaning forward as though watching theater. Except this wasn't theater. This was the moment the curtain ripped down. I held up the final document. Proof of misused donor funds, small diversions traced from the trust to shell accounts under Daniel's management. It was the nail neither of them expected. Gasps rose, sharper this time, followed by silence so dense it seemed to hum. Daniel's face drained of color. He reached for the microphone, but his hand shook. This is slander." "No," I said, sliding the document across the podium toward him. "This is your reflection." He looked down, and for the first time I saw him see himself. Not the golden husband. Not the charming donor's favorite. Just a man caught in the truth of his own greed. Lila's reflection came a second later, when she realized the audience wasn't gasping at me. They were staring at her. The woman who once glowed in every room now looked brittle under the weight of silence. Her eyes darted, desperate, but found no rescue. The hall held its breath. I didn't need applause. I didn't need sympathy. The truth was applause enough. I closed the folder and stepped back from the microphone. "You may continue your program," I said to the MC, whose mouth hung open like he'd forgotten how to speak. Then I turned. My heels clicked against the stage, steady as a drumbeat. Behind me, the room was a storm of whispers and broken glass. But I didn't look back. Applause would have been too small. Forgiveness would have been too cheap. What I carried out of that hall was something larger, the certainty that I had returned not to reclaim them, but to release myself. And I didn't need anyone's permission to walk away. After the gala, the storm wasn't mine to manage. The systems moved on their own. Auditors opened files, board members held emergency meetings, and donors withdrew with the speed of retreating tide. Daniel and Lila's names began to fade from the programs they once forced their way into. I didn't testify with fireworks or fury. I signed papers, answered questions calmly, and let institutions do what they were designed to do. Justice didn't need me shouting anymore. I returned to Providence quietly. The apartment was still small, the radiator still hissed at night, but the air felt different now, lighter. I no longer lived as Ann Carter out of hiding. I lived as her by choice. A name I had worn like camouflage had become a banner of survival. One morning, on my way to the office, I stopped at the harbor. Children were on a field trip, pointing at fishing boats, laughing at the gulls. One boy tugged on my sleeve. "Are you the lighthouse lady?" he asked, the same phrase I'd once heard from a student in Boston. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "Why do you think that?" "Because you stand tall, even when the waves look big." I smiled, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a mask. Maybe I am. He ran back to his group, leaving me with the echo of his words. Sometimes recognition comes not from the powerful, but from the ones who see clearly without being asked to. That night, I sat at my desk with the manila envelope, the one I had kept all this time, the same envelope Lila had handed me at the altar, creased now at the corners, its paper yellowed with months of handling. I held it for a long moment, my thumb tracing the seal as if it could still burn me. Then I slid it into the fireplace. The paper curled, blackened, and collapsed into ash. Closure doesn't roar, it whispers. I didn't check the news anymore. I didn't need to know how Daniel explained himself, or whether Lila tried to twist the narrative into victimhood. The systems would decide. Their reputations would calcify in records and reports, not in my memory. My work was elsewhere now, in the cases stacked on my desk, in the people who needed someone to stand still while the world tried to sweep them away. Weeks later, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, no name. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a donor list with my name highlighted beside the words, Founder Emerita. Nora's handwriting was in the margin. "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Forgiveness is not always the gift we owe. Sometimes silence is the only answer left. I folded the page once and tucked it into a drawer, not for her sake, but for mine. A record that the world, in its fractured way, had acknowledged the truth. On a Sunday afternoon, I walked to the shoreline just outside the city. The tide was low, rocks glistening like polished bones. I stood there until the sun lowered, letting the wind pull at my hair. There was no audience, no ceremony, just the sound of water reshaping stone grain by grain. For a long time, I thought revenge was the fire that would save me. But fire consumes. What saved me was quieter, the ability to walk away, to let systems burn the paper trail while I carried only myself forward. As the last light caught the water, I whispered into the wind. Not to Daniel or to Lila, but to the girl I had been at the altar. "You survived. You're free." And the sea answered in silence, which was all the closure I needed. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or even your own experiences in the comments.